Good morning. My name is Amy Kochek with Amy Kochek Creative, and I have a lovely lag going on with my technology. Let's hope that it corrects itself. But welcome to Extraordinary Stories with Extraordinary People. Like I said, I am Amy Kochek with Amy Kochek Creative. I created this show actually a few months ago, so this is relatively new because in my business, I do all things story. So I'm a ghostwriter, I'm a coach. I help people write their books, but I also help people just simply use their story to have personal breakthroughs in their lives. And I just so believe in the power of story. And I started becoming frustrated when I would talk to people and I would tell them what I did and talk about stories, and they would say things like, "Oh my God, I want to write a book," or "I know someone that needs to write a book," or "I have a great story to tell." And I always follow that with, "Well, what are you doing with it? Are you telling your story?" And a lot of times it was met with excuses and stories locked inside of people and not being shared. So I decided to use this platform as an opportunity to just highlight some really amazing people all over the globe who are doing phenomenal things with their lives and have really amazing stories. And I know just personally from doing the interviews, my life has been changed by so many people, whether it just be the things that they've overcome, the things that they have learned. Stories are what connects us. So I try to do these 2 times a week, and my guests have never, ever disappointed. I've always come away with such great information and just gotten a lot of feedback from all of you who have been watching, who have said that they've been changed as well. So this morning I am so excited. I have Billy Mays. Billy, do you want me to call you Billy Mays the Third or just Billy Mays? Just Billy, right?
It's up to you. Yeah, whatever you want to call me.
Yeah, so I have Billy on today. Such a fascinating story, such an influential individual, especially in the St. Pete area. So, Billy, let's just start off. Just tell us who you are, what you do, any relevant information you want to share.
Um, I am a musician, I guess, is the easiest thing to say. I make solo, kind of one man band, guitar based music under the name Infinite Third. And a lot of people see me locally with that. And it's sort of a more serious presentation. And then I have a second project called Mouth Council, which is kind of the opposite. It's completely open source and it's interactive with the audience, and it's a looping experience where we make spontaneous music on the spot. And those are kind of my two like parallel projects that I'm equally pursuing at all times. And right now they pretty much amount to my my offering, my career.
Yeah. Can you talk about Mouth Council really quick? Because I had an individual who actually talked about you and talked about her experience with Mouth Council. And she
Oh.
said it was one of the most unique, entertaining things that she's ever done in St. Pete. So tell us like how you started that and then what it kind of entails.
Okay. Mouth Council started actually really primitive. If you're familiar with what a loop station is, yeah, are you familiar with it?
No,
Okay, a loop
no,
station.
talk to us in our most simple form.
There's a bunch of different kinds, and basically whatever the input sound wise is, you can press a button and it'll start recording. And then when you press the button again, it starts playing that thing back and looping it over and over again.
Okay.
So people do it with guitar or with anything you want. And I've always done that with guitar since I started playing live. Like that was kind of what I based my live set on, is that I could loop with myself and jam with myself and be a one person band. And about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I was just with some friends and I was playing music and they wanted to kind of join in, and I was looping and they would start singing. I would just hand them the microphone and they would start singing. So I would loop in what they were doing. And then at one point I figured out that like when friends are around, I could just go straight to that. And I got the microphone and I had this primitive loop station that only did one thing. It recorded and played back pretty much. And we would do it with that. And it would be fun. It would be like, oh, this is interesting. Like we get to loop someone's voice, but like there was nothing I could do with it to make it better than just what we did, like effects and stuff like that. So then about 5 years ago, maybe 6 now, this machine came out that has 5 tracks that you can record on, and so many different options for effects, but it's also very simple still. And I knew as soon as I saw that it was coming out, I was like, that's exactly what I need for this. And they call it like a tabletop looper. It's made more for your hands than for your feet. So I was on the waiting list for that, and I got it. It's called the RC505 by Boss, and I'm pretty much like an unofficial ambassador at this point because I think I inspire a lot of people to buy it, and I've actually thought about offering lessons for it now.
Yeah.
And then so one of those first friends that would loop with me, he was just joking one day, and after we did it with like a bigger group, and he was just like, "Man, that's so cool what we're doing. It's almost like some kind of mouth council." And he doesn't even remember saying it, and I was like, "Yeah, we should call it mouth council." And so now it's just this thing that I do, and it's sort of expanded to basically include anyone, anywhere, and not only does it work as a performance on a stage, it works at a party. Or I sometimes get hired for like a birthday party or something like that. I've done it as a workshop that's more about expression and with talking and demonstrations and stuff. And then I've also done it as like a corporate team building exercise.
Yeah.
So it's very diverse. So having that along with my Infinite Third stuff, I kind of have all my bases covered, and I can offer a lot of different things in a lot of different places.
Yeah, that is so exciting. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple major pivotal moments in your life, and kind of loop that back into how that's influenced how you do music now.
Yeah.
So as with everyone who does this show, we focus on one pivotal moment. And for you, I know we have two specific that we want to talk about. So set us up before the pivotal moment, like what's going on in your life, who are you? Give us as much background information as you can, and then jump right into those moments.
When I graduated high school in Pittsburgh, I lived the first 18 years of my life in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with my mom. And when I graduated high school, I went straight to Florida where my dad was living. I went over to Orlando, and I went to Full Sail, which is a recording arts / all these other technology college. And now it's a university. But anyway, I obtained my bachelor's degree. I went for recording arts and entertainment business. And I had my bachelor's degree by the time I was 20. So it was this accelerated program. So I'm 20 and I'm like trying to figure out what I want to do. And I have this degree. So I move in with my dad in Tampa here in the Tampa area. And I sort of have like maybe 2 years of just doing freelance like production work and like just, I don't know. I was young. I don't feel like I really knew what I wanted to do at all. And but at the same time, I was making music all the time, like I always had since high school. And then I believe I was 22, and this is 2009, February 2009. I moved out of my dad's house, and I got my own place in Clearwater area. Actually, it was North St. Pete. And within 1 week of moving in, I woke up in the middle of the night to a knock on the door, and it was my neighbor, and he was saying, "Hey, there's a fire. Grab your stuff, and you got to get out." And I'm like half asleep, and I think, all right, well, I grab my wallet, my keys, and my phone, and make it to the door. And by the time I get back to the door, we're on the second floor. The stairs, the only way down, are covered in flames. And thankfully, this neighbor was like a badass dude, and he like broke the fire extinguisher thing, and he starts like spraying the fire, and then he's like, go, 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 and run past. And by the time I got downstairs and turned around, the entire roof of my apartment, my specific apartment, was covered in flames.
Yeah.
So I'm like in shock. This all happened in like 10 minutes. And next thing I know, we're watching all this drama unfold of like all the neighbors trying to get out, and the fire trucks come, and they're trying to stop this fire. But like my apartment was already just done. It was done. And at one point I remember feeling like this kind of like, oh yeah, maybe I'll be able to go save a few things. You know, it doesn't look like. And then they're just spraying the hose into my roof and like flooding my apartment. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
somebody told me like even if they even if there's anything that's like not burned, it will now be toxic because of the
yeah.
chemicals that they use to put out the fire. So it was all kind of just shocking and mind blowing. And I had just moved in, so like a lot of my stuff was just in boxes, and it was probably just easy to. It was like a bonfire probably,
Yeah.
and I had set up my studio with all kinds of equipment, and probably the most important thing that I lost was I had a custom made guitar that my friend built for me. One of my best friends in the world was a guitar maker, and he built just a specified guitar for me, and I had only had it. He had given it to me about 2 months or a month before I moved out of my dad's house.
Yeah.
And he was actually the first person I called as the apartment was burning down, because I was just like, oh man, I'm watching my apartment burn down. The guitar's in there. And he was just, he woke up, he was just like, he started crying on the phone, and I was like, no, it's all right. I think I might be able to save it. And then he said, no, I guarantee that was the first thing that went up in flames, because the lacquer finish isn't even dry yet, because it takes months to dry.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was all kind of funny looking back, but it wasn't funny at the time.
Right.
But yeah, so that was literally like so unexpected, and I not only lost everything, but I lost like all my clothes. So I had like the clothes I was wearing, which was like sleep clothes, and I think Salvation Army came and gave everybody like $120 to go buy some clothes, and so I did. I bought a couple shirts, but man, that was it was sort of a weird, like, I don't know if it was a wake up call, but it was just out of nowhere. It just seemed like you don't even think about that, you know? And I didn't have renter's insurance or anything. I had just moved in, so I didn't really think about it yet.
Yeah. How did you navigate like that? Like there's two things that like seem to be happening is like the shock of it, because that was like a near death experience. So the shock of it, and then the realizing that like you literally have zero material possessions except the clothes on your back. How did you navigate the emotions that went with that?
I think there was like trauma around the experience of it. And like, I remember one of the things that I lost was my passport, and I had a Switzerland trip to visit my aunt booked for 2 weeks later. So I had to figure out how to get a passport. I drove to Miami. We decided to still go. But I remember being in Switzerland and staying in this cabin and being afraid, because I was on like the 5th floor of this cabin. It was all wood. And I just remember not being able to sleep, because I'm thinking, are fires just like a thing that are going to happen in my life now? And I would get like PTSD whenever I would smell like a bonfire or something, or any kind of fire. But on top of that, I feel like that first week or two, there was a very light feeling of like clean slate. Don't have to worry about carrying around my stuff, or I still had my car, so that was good. And I had a place to stay. And I think like that part was almost like surprising, that I was sort of happier somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you start to kind of recover your life and start to recollect your stuff. And then what happens after that?
So thankfully my dad was very helpful in getting me the basics, and I found a new apartment maybe like 3 months later. And I think so the fire was in February. I think this was in the end of May. I moved into this place, and my dad helped me out with like furniture, bed, like all the things that I needed that I couldn't afford at the time.
Yeah.
And then I slowly built up my other stuff. And also in this time I got a guitar and an amp. And like, instead of having all the stuff that I always had, I only had a guitar and an amp. So it was like this simplistic way of like expressing myself again. And it was really refreshing, because I was too stuck on all the technology and everything at the time, that just having a guitar again was a great feeling. So I started writing music that was way different than anything I ever wrote. It was much more gentle and kind of connected to my emotions more.
Yeah.
And then then I'm like moved into the new place in June, and it's like getting settled in. And then June 28th, 2009, my dad just passed away in his sleep. And that was sort of like much different trauma.
Yeah.
I got a call in the morning. Basically, I decided to turn my phone off for the one night I've ever done that in my life. I turned my phone off because I was like just feeling anxious about something. I don't even remember what. And I turned my phone off, and my partner at the time wakes me up in the morning and says, "Hey, my mom just called and said, you need to call your mom. Everything's fine." So I'm like, all right, I'll turn my phone on. Everything's fine. What's up, mom? And then she's just like crying as soon as I answer the phone. And then I'm like, oh. And I remember kind of just like losing it for a second. Just like, I don't know, kind of just like the instant, just like falling down kind of thing. And then I think within like 2 minutes of that, I got this like overwhelming sense of like everything's okay. And I started kind of going from that place really soon. And it's sort of, maybe it's something that people do, you know, to like cope, like you kind of shut off the trauma part, and then you kind of push forward. But there was something instantly that I feel that I learned that had to do with like acceptance, like not dwelling on, I wish that he didn't die. It was more like, he died, this sucks, everything sucks about it, but I have to start from the reality of it. And that was something that like was being told to me. It felt like from whatever source, I felt that it was remarkably clear that I needed to learn acceptance, and this was how I was learning it.
Yeah. How did you, I mean, just from the standpoint of losing a parent, that's a different type of loss. How did you navigate that grief process? Was it a process, or did you just find that acceptance was your way of coping?
Well, my situation is a little untraditional because my dad was a famous person, and he was sort of at the peak of his career at this moment when he died.
Because he was the OxyClean guy, right?
He was the OxyClean guy. He was a pitchman for his whole life. Yeah. And he only became famous when he was about 40. He got on TV finally after doing a bunch of like touring, I guess, home and garden shows and carnivals and stuff. And he died when he was 50. So he had about 10 years of like navigating how to grow that part of his career. And then he did. And he got a reality show on Discovery Channel called Pitchmen. And I was on it a little bit. And
cool.
Actually, the timing was ridiculous because it was a hit show. They were in the first season. They were about to renew it for the second season. And the week that the season finale was airing was the week that he died. So everything sort of it was just shocking, the timing as well, because I remember being in Pittsburgh with everyone there for the funeral at the hotel room, and they're airing the season finale at the hotel with little tributes patched in each commercial break.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of love and a lot of support online. I was like big into Twitter at the time. I had just joined Twitter in like March of 2009 after the fire. So I was figuring out what Twitter was. I think everybody was figuring out what Twitter was. And funny enough, they confirmed my dad's death through my tweet, and it was like popping up on the news and stuff like that. Because this was a time where like things were different than now. Like this was, people look at 2009 as like the year we started mourning celebrities together at the same time, you know, because there were a lot of deaths at that time. There was Patrick Swayze, Farrah Fawcett, Ed McMahon, David Carradine, Michael Jackson was a few days before my dad. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of all hit us at once, and like so much so that South Park did an episode called Dead Celebrities that season that my dad was there. They were all in. So me navigating it was kind of, I feel like I had extra support, but I also had like a isolation in that it didn't feel like that understandable, the parts about the public, like dealing with the public, because nobody that was around me like really knew how to deal with the public or had to deal with the public. So I sort of became the unofficial voice of, you know, my dad and our family and stuff. And I was, like I said, I was only 22 at the time. So I felt like I was just kind of trying to figure it out. And what I learned then was that I got really like, I guess, sort of needy of the positive, you know, and
Yeah.
then not realizing that like there was always a negative that was gonna also follow. Like people are just mean sometimes, and like they like to troll and harass people. So in August, there was like a toxicology report that came out, and TMZ reported on it, and like there was a lot going on. There was painkillers, and because my dad was in a bad spot, he had a bad hip, and he had two botched hip replacement surgeries that didn't take. So he was scheduled for his third hip replacement the Monday after he died on Saturday.
Yeah.
So he was living in pain and he was coping, however, and like we were all starting to figure out that he was like living in such pain, and he had to either take painkillers and be kind of out of it to be able to walk, or he would be miserable. And so when he would work, he was sort of in a place in between where he would pitch on commercials. Um, so when the thing that also came out in the toxicology report was just such a small footnote, and it said something about that TMZ reported it as cocaine use contributed to my dad's death. But if you look at the thing, it's not even really about that. It was that they found a calcium deposit that sometimes points to within the week prior that he might have used cocaine. And like, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
But it was the judgment that I found um, firsthand, where a lot of the negative people came out and said, what a an addict, or kind of just shaming me even about it. And it just blew my mind that you would see someone grieving and you would attack them, or on another level that you would see someone had a problem and however they dealt with it and they died because of it, and that you would lose respect for that person. And that just goes to show how we look at addiction and how we look at people who are self-medicating, and we have such judgments around it, and it reflects in our how we police it and how we deal with it as a society.
Yeah. When you were going through the grieving process, what did you find was um I don't know, what did you find to be helpful for you? I know like some people journal, some people
Yeah.
go to the gravesite. I mean, like what did you find was helpful for you in that process of grief?
Well, one thing that was really helpful was people sending me like tribute art, and that was something I feel that I don't think a lot of people get when their parent dies, like just
Yeah.
an outpouring of like, sort of displays of tribute like that. Um, so that was one thing. I was basically writing music right before he died, kind of inspired by the fire, and I stopped making music for like 2 months after he died. And once that thing hit in August, like the media side of everything hit, I was I was lucky enough to be able to go on this retreat. There was a week long retreat that I would have never been able to afford. It would have been like thousands of dollars. It's where Oprah goes, and it's in LA. But my dad did a nice thing for the person who owns it before he died, and she basically wanted him to come out for free. So they basically offered it to me and said, you can come out for free. So it was a week of hiking and working out and eating right. And it's all just very like guided. And so I remember on one of those hikes, there was a silent portion where it was a group, but nobody could talk. And on one of those hikes, just like the same music just started coming back to me in my head, and I heard it perfectly. And from that moment on, I sort of just focused on that. Anytime I had like time in my mind, I would just focus on what I'm creating and like how to structure it and how to make it a reality. So I got home from that and I just started focusing on that, on the music. And that music ultimately became my first album. It's called Gently.
Yeah.
And it was released in December of 2009. Somehow I got it done by then. And
Wow.
I learned as I went along. I recorded it in my apartment. And it's still to this day like some of my best music.
Yeah. How do you feel like those two events, especially the death of your dad, do you feel like those changed you as a musician, and how?
Totally. I Up until that point, I was for some reason I was kind of making like angsty, like metal music, even though it was very melodic. It was kind of like progressive metal music. And I don't even know why. It's just what I defaulted to. And you still find hints of that in my music, but definitely around the time of the fire was when I connected that emotions and expression are like needed together, or else one without the other doesn't really work. So like if I just had the emotions, I didn't have a way to express it, I would be screwed and I'd be stuck in these feelings. And if I just express without connecting it to my emotions, it's kind of empty ultimately. It doesn't really have the meaning. And so that was where I started marrying those two. And ever since then, I've sort of just focused on that. And that's taken me on a bunch of different musical paths. But I definitely feel that the whole point of it is to create a space for expression. So with Mouth Council, it's become this joyful, fun, free flowing expression. But with Infinite Third, it's become this reflective, cathartic expression. And for me to have both of those, I feel really lucky that I was able to create two things that I could just drop into regularly. And that's my job to do.
Yeah. I don't know what your view of like the afterlife is, or what happens when people die, but do you feel like your dad still has somewhat of an influence over the way that you make music and your creative expression?
Totally.
Yeah.
As far as like the afterlife, I don't really subscribe to any specific religious view or anything like that, but my own experience tells me that, for one, the imperfect human that my dad was and the amazing human that he was, the moment he died, he sort of just became this perfect thing. Like he became more than the human body. So I don't know what that means, or if he's floating around, that doesn't matter. It's that I feel him in me, and everything that it's almost like his life just went and became this thing, and then it just exploded everywhere. And now I'm him. Like literally, if you boiled me down to like my DNA, he'd be there. What he did would be there. So, and that's not even to say like any sort of interaction we had, which was a lot. And his influence as a performer is big for me. At some point, it hit me that I'm pretty much doing what he did. I'm doing my version of what he did his whole life. He would travel city to city, and he would have a product and a booth, and he would pitch it. And then his performance was pitching it, and then he would sell that thing at the end of the performance. And mine is I go to a city, I set up my stuff, my booth, and I perform. And then I say, hey, I'm selling these records, I'm selling this merchandise. And it's just so similar that there are times where I just feel like, wow, I'm doing something that my dad knows this feeling. He knew this feeling, and like now I know it. And I'm just sort of like the ancestral ladder, let's say. I'm climbing up that ladder, and he took me far enough, and then I'm keep climbing,
I so resonate with that. I had a conversation with a couple of friends a few weeks ago, and I was talking about my dad. My dad's been gone for a little over a year, and I told them, I said, I feel closer to my dad now than I did when he was alive, because like you said, I feel like he's within me. Like I feel it in what I'm doing, the same that you said. Like I feel like I'm continuing the work that he started, and it's not the same, like the same profession. He was a taxi driver, but my dad loved talking to people.
Probably hearing a lot of people's stories.
Yeah, he loved people's stories, and he loved like helping people own who they were, and like just in so many ways. So I think that that's so beautiful. I think that reflection is so beautiful. From that experience, specifically in 2009, which seemed to be such a pivotal year for you in general, what would you say is like the major lesson that you learned, or the big aha takeaway from that year?
I mean, there's like the obvious of really understanding impermanence. I think what happened after that year was that everything, the bigger picture kind of became easier, of like, well, I've been through a lot, so, I think I can handle it. And then I think the hardest points since then had been relationships ending, like love relationships. I'd say I had like maybe 3 in the past 10 years that lasted a certain amount of time. And then each time they ended in a way that was like painful and hard for me. And I think that that's almost like a safe way to relive like loss, like that. Like relationships are kind of a different kind of loss. Like they're really bad and they hurt, but it's almost like, well, the person's still alive. Like we're all good. Like you kind of just learned a lot. And so a lot of my lessons since then have been from that. And I think that those two things together were like, it's almost like I learned the deep lesson and then I had to like practice it with like losing people and then like still loving them and learning for myself and focusing back on myself. And so somehow I think it all kind of related to not trying to control things.
Yeah.
Ultimately. So all the ways that I try to control everything, like I've learned it in my music that both of my projects are designed that the less control that I try to exert on them when they happen, the better they turn out. So like Mouth Council, I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know what anyone's going to do, but I'm going to make it the best that I can from what people do. And same with Infinite Third. I'm going to sit down, and even if I'm in a bad mood, I'm just going to like settle in and breathe and not have a plan. I don't have a plan like this is how I'm going to start it. I just sort of start going, and it's like a martial art. And so I think that would be the biggest lesson is that illusion of control that I keep trying to go for. I still go for it, but it's better to just let go of that and kind of let things happen.
Yeah, I love that. From your experiences, I want you to talk directly to anyone that is watching who may have experienced a considerable amount of loss. It doesn't have to even be loss of a person, but loss of things, loss of a dream, and they're currently in the grieving process. What would be your word of encouragement or piece of advice that you could give them?
Probably that. Well, I don't know if this is possible to remember like while you're in the thick of it, but I think we tend to think that the heaviness or the despair is permanent. And if only we took the lesson from the impermanent thing that we just experienced and said, well, this is probably impermanent too, then you might not treat it as like a condition that you have. And it's more just like a wave popping up. And I like to look at it as even if like you feel great again, and then you feel sometimes some grief will come back up, or forever grief will come back up, and you'll think, oh, I must not be doing the right thing. And when really it's like one that's either just a wave, or you're so ingrained with the habits that it's almost like a burp of like, this is what you're still processing. Like, just check it out. And then like, don't think too much of it. You don't have to attach to it, I guess is the point. And trust me, we went into like the inspirational part of 2009 and everything, but like, I would say the harder point was like 2010, 11, parts of 2012, like where, I felt like I got through this big thing, and then I almost like changed everything and felt like, am I doing the right thing? And then it became more of a kind of an ongoing anxieties about death, about dying in my sleep. Do I have a bad heart? Like all these things, like I wrestled with that I still do sometimes, but I think as long as you have to keep something that that I don't want to call it distractions, but it's more like activities that include those things, your emotions, expression, and engage you. They don't have to be like that intense. It could just be that you walk every day, every morning, like you said.
Yeah.
I think you have to have things like that. You could write every day, whatever, but don't just get lost in it and forget that you're still alive, living.
Right. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So Billy, now you've told us all about your music. How do we listen to it? How do we see you? Because I know you're about to go on tour. How do we get in contact with you?
I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram under Infinite Third. That's spelled out THIRD. My new album that I just released on my 33rd birthday last week is on Spotify and Apple and all the streaming services. It's called Imprints. You can go to infinitethird.com to check out the dates that I'm playing. It's always updated, even with tour dates and local dates. And it usually has a little link on next to each date to go to an event page. Anybody watching right now who's in St. Pete, I'm playing on August 30th at Grassroots, which is where we met.
Yeah.
Upstairs at Grassroots, 8 to midnight on August 30th. That's my tour kickoff show. So the next day I'll be leaving for 2 weeks on tour. But yeah, on top of that, I'm just about to start offering sort of like consultation looping sessions. So if you're interested in looping music or getting into it, I'm trying to make like a sliding scale basically that and it's more about the philosophy of it all than it is, as you can imagine with how I talk. It's less about the technology, like we get into all that, but it's more about the philosophy and the improvisation and spontaneity and stuff, and sort of how I look at things. So if anybody's interested in that, just you can find me. And there's nothing formal about that yet. I don't know if there will be, but I'll probably make a few posts about it. But
that's awesome.
I'm saying it here.
And we are going to put those links into the comments so that people can find you a little bit easier. But Billy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
Your vulnerability. I just so appreciate it. And I say this at the end of every episode, please, please, please make connections. So if something that Billy said resonated with you, purchase his music, contact him, talk to him. That's what makes life worth living, is our stories. That's why we connect. That's why my dad drove a taxi. I don't think that's really like that. My dad just really liked talking to people and connecting, which is why I do what I do and why it's what drives us. So connect on relationships. So have a wonderful, wonderful day. We will see you next week with another episode of Extraordinary Stories with Extraordinary People.